Welcome to the next episode of Two Derby Nuts. I'm Scott Heima, and with me for this episode is Joe McFarland. Joe's been involved in our brigade group here in Western New York for many years, and I brought him in, and this episode is going to deal with how to make a fast car. Jason and I are pretty obsessed in the disease you saw in previous episodes about designing a cool looking car. But Joe knows how to make a fast car, but it always wasn't that way. So Joe, you were telling me a little bit before we came on here about one of the first cars that you ever had in a derby race, and your grandfather was involved. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I was in fourth grade, I entered a derby, and my grandfather helped me design a car. And really, he did it all. My father didn't know how to make cars. And this car actually won like Southeast Ohio at the time. Fast forward, I then went.
Did you do anything on the car?
I did nothing on the car at all.
That's just like I talked about earlier at the movie Down in Derby. Dad's obsessed, won't even let the car. Didn't you say your grandfather even built his own track?
Yeah, he built his own track, and then the next year we went even farther in the state of Ohio.
No, hey.
What's the matter?
Well, let's just look at it for a minute. No. Yeah, I thought we were just looking.
I thought we already did look.
Phil, I have heard that this can happen with Pinewood Derby cars, but it's not going to happen in this house.
Dad.
Phil, this is Brady's car. You have to share.
Yeah.
He's supposed to make it with your supervision. Like the manual says.
So
Joe's grandfather is a derby nut. We should. Is he still alive? We should have him on an episode.
No, he's not. But it was exciting as a kid. But what it left me is when it came for time for me to build a car with my boys, I had no clue. I didn't know what I was doing. The only salvation I had was I had a wife that was pretty artistic, and so we built a car that first year, and it won third place for creative design. But it finished almost dead last. There's probably 14, 15 cars there, dead last. And, my son was happy with the third place, but he's like, Dad, I really would like to win speed. He goes, I don't want a slow car. So I guess this is for all you dads and moms that are helping with this that don't have any skills. I had no skills. I don't know how to do woodworking. I don't know how to do any of that. But I did get on the internet. I started looking stuff up, and I found stuff that I actually could do. Some people said, buy a drill press. I'm not going to buy a drill press. But I found some things that I could do to make my car faster. And what happened the very next year, going from the bottom we won first place for speed in our CSB group.
And one thing I love about this story is Joe could have said, I don't have the skills. I'm sorry, we'll just maybe not participate. But you chose not to do that and teach your sons to not give up.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, and you guys were always good there. The Rangers that had more experience and kind of, telling us like, keep going at it, keep doing it, and encouraging us. So, I talked to people, but I really looked online, and there's a lot of information online. And over the years, the cars got faster and faster in our whole group, and we did pretty well. We were always like in the top 3 or 4 for speed every year.
Well, there was one year, I believe Joe and his family, there were so many obligations, and he didn't have enough time to make cars. And we were doing our pre-check-in, and I mentioned somebody had asked, where's Joe? He was usually there helping out. It's like, oh, he can't participate. And the response was, oh, great, we have a chance now. So Joe, why don't you tell us, as you had said, that first year, your cars were in the bottom for speed, but very quickly you were always perennially at the top
Right.
for speed. What were some of the things that you learned that you can pass on that guys can do out there to make their car faster?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and it's probably a no-brainer, it really starts with the wheels and the axles. These are some of the cars that I've had, and they spin pretty well. So we looked up online just the best way to take that axle and make sure that there's no imperfections, or as few as you can have. We bought like 1,500 to 2,000 grit sandpaper. You can get that at any of like an auto parts store, and cut that into small strips. And then we spent a lot of time. I would have my sons run the drill, or I would run the drill, and they would sand, and they would, just take a small strip and just sand that whole nail.
So you would put the axle in the drill like
Right.
it was a drill bit?
Yes.
Okay, so yes.
Yeah, and there's actually something you can buy at a hobby store that will let you put that in there. But we would just go with the nail right in the drill.
Yeah.
And then spin that and get that really, really smooth. Make sure that you use the file to take any burrs off the underside of the nail head. We would do that. And then I would definitely polish that with like a mother's polish that you can buy to polish that nail. The next part that I then looked at was, where does the wheel actually touch the wood of the car?
Yeah.
And make sure that I didn't paint that. And then I would also use that 2,000 grits sandpaper, make that like all, super smooth. And then we would take the wheels. And one thing I learned with the wheels is you get a pipe cleaner, you put a little toothpaste on them, and you put the pipe cleaner
Toothpaste. I've been doing a derby a long time. That's the first time I've heard toothpaste.
Well, toothpaste has a little bit of grit in it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we would put it inside the wheel. We put the pipe cleaner in the drill, make it tight, put a little bit of toothpaste on it, and then you would stick it inside the wheel around and really shine up the inside of the wheel. Then we'd wash the wheels and so forth to get all that grit out. And those were the major things. Obviously, we would have something also with weight placement.
Right.
Our track has a longer straightaway, so it meant that
and it has a hard curve. I think that is a big key, where if you've got a track that's all downhill, there's no curve, your weight placement's a little bit different. But if we could stay to the wheels and go to what
Sure.
weight, just a few things that I've learned over the years as well is you want your wheel to spin naturally. I usually target between 12 to 15 seconds. If you spin it and it dies just after a few rotations, friction is your enemy as far as speed. So sometimes you may have to open up the hole in the wheel a little bit bigger. But if you open it up too much, the wheel's going to wobble. So Joe had mentioned about not buying a drill press. You can do it by hand, but this you really would want to do by a drill press. Take the wheel and bore out the center of the wheel to open that wheel up a little bit more. So you're reducing the friction on the nail of the axle. And so that frees it up. And that's another way to do it. And then, but after you do that, make sure that you polish, as Joe had mentioned. I learned about toothpaste now, so I'm gonna have to try that to get the inside of the wheel. And I've always believed that there's 3 keys to a fast car. And Joe hit on number 1 in my estimation, and I believe he believes it too: wheels. That the axles and the wheels. Number 2 is weight placement, as he was talking about.
Right.
So you want to share a little bit what you learned about weight placement on a car?
Yeah, I mean, our track has a long straightaway. So if you think of potential energy, you want the weight as far back in the car as you could possibly have it. So the weight's higher. And once it hits that straightaway, you're going to transfer that potential energy into kinetic energy. If you remember, we did really well, and we went to regionals one year, I think up in the north part of Buffalo. And you had forgotten to tell us that track,
it's all downhill.
It was all downhill, and it had a really short straightaway. So none of us changed the weight, and we were behind downhill. And then we would get the straightaway, we'd start to catch up, and the race was over. So we all did pretty poorly. So one thing we learned is you got to change your weight based on the track.
Yes. And we had talked about in an episode with Jason about potentially turning the car around, and that you that probably would have been a good time for that if the weight
thought
is
of that.
primarily in the back, race it backwards. And the third aspect is the aerodynamics. Now, a lot of people think that you need that doorstop or wedge look. You really don't. Joe has some of his, faster cars here, and you can see that they're fairly have a high profile. Nothing like what I had shown in earlier episodes with my motorhome, and those really high profiles will slow it down quite a bit, but it's not as important as your wheels for a speed. Any other tips that you might have or want to share with us?
No, that's as far as my experience goes. Again, if you're not really good like I was, just a few things can really ensure that you have a very competitive car.
Yeah, and friction is your enemy as far as speed. Any little knock, most tracks, the car rides on a track where there's two grooves. Okay, it's kind of hard to describe to you without showing you, but the track, kind of like my two fingers here, and the car will fit over the top of it. So anytime your wheel hits, you're losing thousandths of a second, and those sometimes can be a difference between first and fourth in just one heat. And so you want your car running as straight as possible. Not only should that spin freely, Joe had talked about doesn't want it bumping up against the inside of the car against the block of wood. Many times I'll take my cars and I will find like my linoleum floor in my kitchen or a hardwood floor where there's a nice long straight edge. I'll take that and I'll push it and see how straight it goes. If it's veering off to the left or the right, I'll adjust and push my wheels to get that as straight as possible. I'll do all of this before I finally glue them in place. And you've got to be very careful. Joe had talked about painting the wheels. Some of you do that for design, and you got to be careful that you don't get paint on the inside where the axle touches the wheel, as well as if you're gluing your axles into place. I always like to use a toothpick and almost like paint it in there just enough so that it will stay secure, because you don't want to get that glue anywhere near the wheel, because it will really slow that down. Well, thank you, Joe. Thanks for joining us today. This has been another episode of Two Derby Nuts. I'm Scott Heima. This is Joe McFarland. And this episode, again, has been brought to you by StocKar Derby.